Dr. Chase Cunningham focuses on helping senior technology executives with their plans to leverage comprehensive security controls and the use of a variety of standards, framework, and tools to enable secure business operations. His work focuses on integrating security into operations, leveraging advanced security solutions, empowering operations through artificial intelligence and machine learning, and planning for future growth within secure systems. I had a great pleasure to have a fireside chat with Dr. Cunningham. I hope you enjoy it. I have a great honor to present Dr. Chase Cunningham, who I've been following for quite some time on LinkedIn. I've been reading some of the posts, and it's funny because I've been using these virtual sessions to reach out to folks that would normally not necessarily be capable of presenting or being part of the physical events in New York City on a month-to-month basis. But I'm hoping that after this conversation, once this whole COVID-19 bowls through, we'll be able to meet physically in one of the New York City events. So Dr. Cunningham, why don't we start with just like I typically ask this on a regular basis, but I think for you there's a special meaning. What's your favorite superhero and why?
That's a loaded question. So my favorite superhero would probably be my superhero, which is the Sinja, Cyber Ninja, which is a comic I published a few years ago now. And I mean, that one's near and dear to my heart because it's cybersecurity and it's kids and whatnot. But I mean, honestly, if you were to say what was my sort of favorite superhero story, I'm a big fan of the Punisher when I look at the Marvel comic series.
So tell me about the Sinja. Maybe about the book, and why did you think that? I personally believe that cybersecurity is super important for kids and for everybody, but for teens and adults as combined. But how do you come about to publish that book? And
well, when I was transitioning out of active duty, I got lucky enough to do some work with the FBI, and I was on one of the child cybercrime task forces for a little bit. And I unfortunately was exposed to some of the really bad things that happen to kids in cyberspace, and it was honestly disgusting. And I saw things no person would ever want to see, and that kind of led me to look around and go, well, is there any books I can, point my kids to so that they can understand cybersecurity, but that weren't that kind of lame, like here's a dog doing cybersecurity Cookie Monster type stuff. And there wasn't. So basically I contacted a friend of mine and we kind of came up with a comic on our own. And now we have three novels, and it's in 4 languages. So it's been fun to do that. And every once in a while I'll have a kid send me like a Sinja birthday party thing, and that's kind of cool.
Do you think that should be part of the curriculum in schools?
I think it should. Like my kids have a cybersecurity curriculum at their school, and funny enough, I looked at it and I was like, I read through it and I was like, this is IT operations and a little bit of security stuff, but it wasn't cybersecurity. And I think most school districts probably are along those lines where they're doing the right thing. Like they're trying to teach kids about IT and security, but they don't teach them about cybersecurity and kind of that there is a really kind of nasty side of this. It's and that's scary to me, honestly.
Yeah. So what do you think can be changed? And, what would you recommend if, for someone who has kids, like where can you direct them, to potentially have them more aware of what's out there?
I think honestly that selfishly, I think my book is actually a pretty solid one, but I've given a lot of those away to people free because I think that the message is more important than, making money on it. And obviously you're not going to retire off a comic book, right? But,
maybe it's if you make a limited edition one.
Yeah, right.
50 years.
But I think the stuff that I point people to for their kids is like the FBI actually has a pretty good site that you can point kids to, and just some of those, the FSI SEC and some of those folks have got pretty solid sites around kids. I would say don't point them towards the vendor stuff that kind of talks about, because they're ultimately trying to sell you a product, right? And it's kind of useful, but it still is slightly vectored towards the vendor side of the equation. So I think if you Google it, there's another one that's like, I think it's called the Cyber Hero Project or something like that by a guy named Ben that's published some comic stuff around there, and it's pretty solid too.
Yeah. So what's interesting about you that, and I kind of made the comment, you're very accomplished. You've done quite a bit. You have, 2 young kids. You wrote multiple books. You spent some, quite a few years in the Navy. And it's really remarkable. You've done a PhD. I mean, you've done, more things in your lifetime that people would probably do in multiple lifetimes. So first of all, if you can walk us through, some of the things you've done and how you got to where you are today. What was you're obviously very driven. What was the kind of the driving force, and how did you get to be where you are today? If you can just walk us through it.
Sure. So funny enough, I'm a farm kid. I grew up on a farm in the middle of Texas. I graduated high school with 51 people, and we were the largest graduating class they'd ever had. So I was there. I didn't want to live in farm town the rest of my life, so I jumped in and joined the Navy. I actually joined the Navy as a diesel mechanic, and started out fixing engines and those type of things, and sort of just by dumb luck transitioned into an open career field in cybersecurity. And then lucky enough, I got medically retired thanks to some injuries I got overseas back in 2012. And came out of there, and because of where I'd been working, I managed to stay in the industry and just kind of kept following along that path of cybersecurity. And I was doing pen testing and red teaming for quite a while and whatnot, and then that transitioned into more operational side of stuff. And lucky enough to continue to follow along. And I mean, to be perfectly honest, it's been 15% me. 85% blessings and help from everybody else around me, and the drive and stuff helps. But at the end of the day, I mean, I've been so fortunate to be surrounded by people that have been willing to help me.
You're also very humble, and it's nice to see, but it's like, I have to tell you, like, we talked about this, prior to, how many people are, enrolled in a PhD program. And how many of them start, and how many of them actually complete the program. How many people are have a to-do list with like 10 things, like number 3 is like write a book.
Yeah.
and you mentioned that you wrote the book, your latest one, in 3 months, right prior to RSA this past year. So if you don't mind, first of all, let's touch a bit about what you've done in your PhD program. What was your dissertation about, and then maybe you could jump about and talk about some of the topics in the book.
Yeah, so PhD, I basically came up with a predictive model that looked at how people were accessing files and what they were saying in their emails. And this is probably slightly creepy for some people, but it was a PhD project where I was looking through what people were saying in my email chain and whatnot, and was able to predict when they were going to do something that was malicious. So if you can imagine, somebody's in emails like, I really hate this job, my boss is a dick. I can't wait to leave here. And then they start looking at some files that they didn't, normally look at. All of a sudden you kick off the system to say, odds are they're going to steal that information, or they're going to take it without, access privileges and those things. So that was my dissertation. It was funny enough, I actually called the project Pit Viper because I was looking for the rats, if you will. And yeah, and it wound up being pretty successful on that end. And I finished that project, and it was sort of an AI ML type thing. And then after that, that transitioned into follow-on work. And I mean, I've done a lot of advisory type of work with folks working on their dissertations and thesis and those type of things to help them get through it.
So, you basically created a minority report, right? For, finding
there were no wooden balls and no Tom Cruise, but yeah, something like that.
So, it's interesting that some of these, and we talked about this as well, is some of these dissertations actually become products, right, in the industry. What does it take to turn something like that into a viable commercial product? If you wanted to take that onwards.
Yeah, I think the difficult thing when you have that is usually there's lots of folks that have really interesting, innovative ways to solve a problem in the dissertation and sort of thesis world and the academic side. But what you transition into is most of the time you're solving a problem that's only specific to your research stream, right? And it's not necessarily a productized problem solution. So that's where you usually run into it, is transitioning from your particular super awesome kind of research that solves a problem and contributes to the zeitgeist and all those kind of cool things. But somebody else on the other side, a business person, is going to say, how do I make money off of this? And if you don't have a way to, enable them to make money, it's going to fall dead on its face. And it could be the best solution ever. It just has to be able to make revenue.
Right. And somebody has to be willing to pay for it, aside from the fact that it's cool. So the latest book, Cyber Warfare, Truth, Tactics, and Strategies. Talk to me about, first of all, why did you decide to write it? What gap have you seen that kind of this book fulfills? What was the process of writing? Is there something different with writing like a cybersecurity focused book as opposed to, a novel? Or, what would you say, if somebody read it tomorrow, what did its kind of top, 3 things that they will, get out of reading it?
So basically, the way the book kind of came out was the day after Thanksgiving 2019. A friend of mine at one of the publishers came and said, "Hey, would you be willing to write a book?" And I said, "Sure, that would be interesting." And they said, "Well, we'd like to have it out by May." And my response was, "Well, if I'm going to write a cybersecurity book, I want it out by RSA, which was February." So November, December, January, live in February, and basically it was buckle down every day at 6:30 p.m. till I decided to fall asleep. I was doing research and writing, and I had a goal of every week, by the end of the week, I would hit X number of pages and send those off to the editor and go from there. And I mean, that process was extremely strenuous, but it was also the only way to get it done in time. Because I mean, for me, back to your point about the product, like there's no better time than to have 40,000 cybersecurity professionals at a show to release a book. So that was my goal, and we got there. And my editor was awesome. They managed to shove all that stuff through the door because I drowned them in material. And it probably would have been a 500-page book if it had been me, because I threw a bunch of stuff that was just useless, and they edited it down to 300 something. And then the book itself, really the crux of it was to try and make people understand how long this sort of warfare concept has been applicable to the space around electronics and cyber and computers and national defense and whatnot. And then also to familiarize folks with the reality of what actually is possible, not what you hear about in the news all the time. So that's why I went into things like deep fakes and autonomous vehicles and drones and those, because there's lots of hype, but how realistic is it?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, the first chapter describes the evolving threats landscape. I think that's something that you just described, and the implication. And so what's kind of the next, frontier for security? And you are involved in a lot of zero trust initiatives these days. Maybe you can kind of give us a kind of a brief overview of that. That'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think where we're at sort of globally right now with this post-COVID world, I mean, most of us are probably working remote, as we've been forced to move into zero trust sort of approach, whether we like to admit it or not. I mean, we're all outside the perimeter, and basically the crux of that strategy is embrace that everything is affected, embrace that everything is probably compromised, control what you can control, and apply control strategically to fix those issues. And when we get into that and we sort of think about, well, what's coming, we can look historically, and that's what I did for my book, was look historically at the problems and how they've evolved. And the problems aren't the technology. The problems are that we've run to market so fast, we never had a way to secure it. And we're in that same space now. And mainly what concerns me the most in the future is a lot of the stuff around video and audio and impersonating individuals and doing things through those means. Because I picture scenarios where you have, national leaders posting videos spouting hate speech, and how do you prove that that's wrong or right or whatever? And if you do, what's the response? And it could be very problematic. And I wrote about that too, about using video and audio to crash portions of the stock market, buy stock. When the company comes out and says that it's fake, stock rebounds, you sell it and you make profit. And that's already shown up in the industry.
Yeah, and I've seen those. So maybe you can explain what I'm sure most people know, but I would like touch upon maybe what deep fakes are. And then there's a couple other ones like that I kind of relate to that, like in terms of influence in deep fakes, AI and machine learning, that is part of that process. And have deep fakes already been used? Because I've seen some videos and they're pretty scary because it's super real.
Yeah, they've been used. There was a case recently with somebody that used a what they call a voice fake, or where they basically had some audio. They used an ML engine. They came up with a fake voice from a CEO, and then they called and said, "Hey, this is the CEO. I need this money transferred." And because the person on the other end said, "Well, that's their voice," they were like, "Sure," and transferred the money. And by the time it was over, it was like, that wasn't me. So I mean, it's already happened. I know the reality of it is that stuff is broadly available. And just like what happened with malware 15, 20 years ago, where you had to be a computer scientist to create malware and that type of thing, and now it's commodity. You can buy it on the underground and use it. Same thing will happen with this read fake and deep fake solutions. And basically, all you're doing there is using high-speed processing and mathematics to create fake videos, fake audio, to impersonate people. And it's you've seen the sort of comedy ones, right, with President Obama and Key and Peele and those guys, whatnot, but it's way more nefarious than that.
Yeah, even the traditional tools, like I think Adobe released a tool where you can basically just get a a short clip, video clip, or actually audio clip, and then create using that, create like a new audio speech, basically, that matches the that also has implications for some biometrics. I know biometrics now have a some controls and liveness detection, right? So to make sure that your image is actually it's you and not someone else. So that has kind of pushes the boundaries there as well. So in terms of, it's really a rat and mouse. And by the way, what you mentioned, the fact that you fear like the speed of us advancing technology does not match the security controls, and I agree. And I think that's also close to the way cars did not have seatbelts until they were already like going 70, 80 miles an hour.
Yeah, those used to be an option. Like that was an optional thing.
Correct. And then they enforced it, and then obviously for common reasons. But so do you feel that's also the case now? We're running 100 miles an hour, but then we don't have any seatbelts on a lot of these tools that we have.
Most of the time, the folks that I work with, I think the best way to think about it is we've been thrown off a cliff and handed a bunch of parts for an airplane, and someone says, "Make sure you put this together before you hit the bottom." And you're scrambling around trying to figure out, well, is this a wing? Is that a fuselage? And how do I put this thing together? And what bolts will go where? So it's technology is awesome. Like, I'm a technologist. I love it. It's great. It's going to improve humanity, like all those things. However, you should secure what you can. And be understanding of the space in which you operate, so that bad things aren't as likely to happen. Bad things are going to happen. That's a given. Just like with cars, you can have the best seatbelt and airbags and whatever else, but ultimately bad things happen. That's just the nature of, life.
Yeah, we can see that now with, for example, Zoom putting in, security controls almost after the fact, after 100,
after they got outed, basically. Yeah.
Correct. So, are the adversaries also adopting to the new technologies out there? I mean, we see and he called this like a kind of a cat and mouse game, where it's always one is faster than others and so on. Like, but do you see that that the adversaries are also kind of adopting themselves and changing tactics in terms of, I mean, I'm sure they also read some of those reviews, right? I'm sure maybe some of them subscribe to Gartner.
Yeah.
Right? Like, hey, maybe so. Or like Forrester, right? They just read those. I'm sure they have access to the same
yeah, I mean, it's that's why I think it was so important for me to kind of bring the history of this whole thing into. And if you look at the space, it's always been a back and forth of defenders do what defenders do, bad guys find a way around it. Defenders do what defenders do, bad guys find a way around it. And that's not going to change. the only real thing that we're continuing to learn from this is it's happening faster. So for every control that we come up with, there's an end around coming around even quicker. And cloud and AI and all these other things are powering both sides. So it's it's kind of like the Cold War, but it's the Cold War new version, Cold War 2.0.
And it's accelerating, right?
That's right. Moore's law. For every you get more stuff faster, that's what's going to happen in cyber.
Yeah. And what's your thoughts about, for example, like the new emerging technologies like quantum computings and the implications on the overall, of the internet?
Yeah, quantum scares the crap out of me. I mean, I was lucky enough that I got invited to go to Microsoft and see their quantum lab, and I was like, whoa, this is awesome. However, it's also terrifying. And then the space-based stuff also scares me to death too, because we have all these satellites around space that are sending telecommunications. No one ever thought about when we launched those in the 70s that we would need to secure them. So,
What about 5G? That's a bit of controversial as well.
Yeah, the 5G stuff is interesting because it's an infrastructure problem, right? It's not even a transmission problem necessarily. 5G just means we can download movies faster, but really when we get further back into it, it's, well, where did we get the modems and the routers and the switches that make all that stuff work? And oh, by the way, are they able to listen in on those?
Yeah, that's one of the areas, and you mentioned in the book as well, like the history of like Stuxnet, like how this whole thing started. Why do you think from all the different malware, like why did Stuxnet create that almost visibility and awareness for a lot of the state programs?
Well, it was one of the first ones that really broke out of the sort of, boundaries of nation state engagements. I mean, typically when you think of NSA versus, the Iranians, it's kind of a unspoken rule that they will go after each other. And that's, how warfare is conducted. But Stuxnet was one of those ones where there was this amazing piece of malware that was created and it leaked out. And once it got out, I mean, it literally was the equivalent of a tactical nuclear weapon leaking on the internet, and every human on planet could go, ooh, I want to play with that. And then they go grab it. Like that's a problem. That's a big deal. And it wasn't because any one group tried to cause that to happen. That's just how things, mature.
Mm-hmm. So do you feel there's going to be a next iteration of Stuxnet, like something like big is going to happen? I know there's some people calling for, like a, doomsday version of like cyber. Do you feel that that's something that we should be fearing?
No, I don't. I don't think. I think that's a great point to make, right? Like, I don't think there's ever a reason to fear. I think it's really about understanding and being able to operate intelligently in the space when there is a threat. It's, I'm not comfortable swimming in the ocean because I know I'm at the bottom of the food chain when I get in the ocean. But I also understand that, as long as I kind of do intelligent things and pay attention to my surroundings, I'll probably come out okay. So it's one of those deals where that's what happens when you go in cyberspace. Like you're the bottom of the food chain if you're just a regular user. Nation states are in there, super hackers are in there, those type of things, and bad stuff will happen. But the doomsday scenario, I don't think that it's quite the doomsday scenario we see in the media.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of media and talking about like Hollywood, I don't know if you saw the movie White Hat.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that cyber criminals don't actually look like that, or or hackers are not what Hollywood shows us.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by that?
Well, typically when you think of hacker, right, you think of hoodie and a Red Bull and darkness and a bunch of code in front of them, and they're just sitting there doing this.
Pizza pockets.
Pizza
pockets, right?
Living with their mother or something, right? Not bathing, that type of deal. So it's not right, because I've been all over. I've been nation state level. I've seen global corporate 50 people. I mean, they're anybody and everybody. They're men, they're women, they're people of different religious backgrounds, whatever. I mean, the reality of it is it is what it is, and everyone can do it. It's not you have to be a super nerd anymore, and that's just unfair. That creates a stereotype that I think we're starting to move out of, because this is big time business, and I mean, I think that I'm emblematic of what people look like that do the type of work, and I'm just a regular dude.
Yeah, no, that's right. You do look like a regular dude. Hey, quick question about influence operations, and we talked. That's kind of related to the deep fakes and what's happening. Is that related? Maybe you can explain a little bit about what that means, and then does it relate to to like the elections that's coming up? What are the implications of things like that that's happening? I don't know if you can kind of cover that briefly.
Yeah. So what influence operations are? There's kind of two sides of it. If you think about historically, in World War II, they would give chocolates to kids in areas where they were invading and that type of thing. And then like when I was deployed, we would do the same thing. We'd give toys away and candy and whatever. And you're trying to gain influence with the populace, right? Make them like you. Well, nowadays we don't have to do that physically. We can do it digitally. And the way that you do that is Twitter and LinkedIn and YouTube and Facebook and whatever. And the influencers, those people with tens of millions, of followers and that type of thing, if you can get access to their account and post stuff that they don't, wouldn't want you posting, or that's just blatantly wrong, you can influence all of those individuals, and it becomes gasoline on a fire. And that's where you run into the problem of sort of those compounding attacks of, well, what if I did a deep fake video from an influencer that had 30 million followers and said really terrible things? Does that cause social unrest?
Possible. So do you know if there's anybody who's monitoring that right now, or doing anything about it, or like having some sort of controls over it?
So there are some vendors that have solutions that are looking into that. I think I put some of the stuff in there around, like Snapper came from Zero Fox. Signal Labs does a lot of work in that space. There's 4 or 5 vendors, but the issue that they run into is they have to be very specialized to do that, because they're dealing with scale and trying to counter influence. And the funny thing, I'm even thinking about doing this in a following book, is like, human beings, we love our biases, right? We all follow, where you were born, how you were raised, your social stuff, like whether we want to admit it or not, we're all biased. That's just how humans are. And if you can introduce a narrative that follows that bias, that validates that bias, people run with it, and that becomes a real problem.
Right. So, do you think that there's the future of elections is digital, or do you think that they're going to have to, still? I mean, we've seen a lot of like controversial evidence that some of this, the voting machines are not insecure and so on.
Yeah.
You think we'll overcome that one day?
I think that maybe we will get there. I think I've seen some interesting projects around sort of the distributed ledger stuff that will maybe impact that. And it's very possible. It still is, it's antiquated in the way that system is working. And the thing that people forget too is ultimately somewhere there's a back end, right? There's always back end infrastructure. And it doesn't matter how cool and sexy and secure your app is, if the back end is open, that's a problem.
Mm-hmm. What type of emerging technologies are currently being developed for for cybersecurity and operations, and maybe mitigation as well, that you've seen recently that you'd like to share with us? How is the enterprise going to look completely different in 3, 4, 5 years in terms of the security stuff?
I mean, I think where you've seen the evolution happen. I mean, this COVID thing, I always try and find the shining, edge in any dark cloud. The COVID thing has been a move towards this new model of remote workforce, BYOD, those type of things. And where we're going to see a lot more of no passwords, BYOD, software-defined perimeter, those type of solutions taking hold in the market. And I mean, in the very near future, depending on how your company runs stuff, you're not going to have to use your password. You're not going to have to use your VPN. You're just going to churn on your machine and do your work, and everything else will be handled on the back end.
So how exactly is that going to be achieved? Give me some
Well, so like for me personally, like I have my BYOD device. I've got all my multi-factor auth running on my phone. When I get up in the morning, because of the controls and the SDP that we run, I open up my Surface, it does its thing on the back end, and I have the agents and all that run, and I'm on the corporate network, and I can get to the internet and do my job, and that's it. And then I log off and I'm done at the end of the day. Whereas the old way was, here's your VPN deal, turn on your VPN, click these two things to make it work, use your password. Your password doesn't work, you call help desk resets your password, you VPN again. It's just archaic. So that's where we're going, is that newer, more dynamic model. And the benefit you get is, as all the security controls that my company infrastructure has are applied to my machine. So I'm not inside the perimeter, but I'm getting the power of their perimeter.
So they've been talking about getting rid of the passwords for a long time. Do you think we're going to see a world without passwords, completely?
I don't think we'll ever get to zero passwords. We'll get towards maybe one or a couple. And you're starting to see it a lot. If you kind of think about your bank and you think about those, like I don't even know my password for my bank anymore, because I set it up a few years ago with a long password, and now it just asks me for biometric auth when I log in. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you still have a password, but you don't have a password reset every 90 days and all that other stuff.
So we better not lose that one, or at least have.
Well, luckily I'm broke anyway, so it doesn't matter.
One of the chapters talk about strategic planning, for the enterprise specifically. Do you mind just describing what that is, and maybe just give some examples of what that looks like?
Yeah, well, if you accept the reality that the space in which we operate in cyberspace is the largest battlefield in history, and it is equal for everybody. North Korea can take on the United States and potentially win in cybersecurity cyberspace because of the digital battlefield. So if that's the case, then you also have to accept that the way that you win in warfare, and this is from someone that's been in a warfighting domain, is with strategy, not with tactics. Tactics employ your strategy. So by doing that, you basically say, for long term, where do I want to be in 3, 5, 7, 10 years? What do I need to get there? And then what are the things that I do to make that happen? So it's a big strategy funneling down into the tactics that you use to get you towards that end state.
What does winning look like? When you're talking about states winning over other states, and then kind of the follow-up to that, would that be are we currently in a Cold War? Are they certain cyber weapons that are equal to the nuclear weapons that people know that they have but never want to use because the consequences for that are tremendous?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in a I guess you'd call it a warm war. It's not cold, not hot, but it's actually taking place, and we're all part of it, whether we're aware of it or whether we realize we're engaged. And the space in which this is taking place is, I mean, every time that you log in, every time you turn on your machine, your kids jump on, they're transiting this live fire battlefield environment, and they need to understand that that's the space in which they're operating. Again, it's not about being afraid, but it's about understanding what's going on there. Just like if you a few years ago decided to go set up a business in downtown Baghdad, you would have probably expected something bad would happen to you if you ran around for a long time. You'd probably catch a round or whatever. So you would at least intelligently understand, these are the things I do to get from house to business. I'm going to put on flat gear. I'm going to have a helmet, whatever. That's what you have to do in cyberspace. And that's where you have to think about it in terms of me and everyone around me, the people I care about. And that plays itself up into the larger side of it. I'm taking care of my family and myself because they're important to me, but I'm also doing what is right for my business because they pay my bills.
Mm-hmm. Understood. And is there an equal, cyber weapon, that would equal a nuclear bomb that people, states
I mean,
have,
I think there's probably some implants within critical infrastructure that would cause outages that could be regional in nature. I mean, if you look at what happened to Estonia back in 2017, if you look at ransomware, how it's kind of evolved lately, I mean, you can take down entire regions, entire businesses, systems, logistics, those type of things. And those are usually the organizations and entities that lag behind. And to your point earlier, the more connected we've become, the more vastly vulnerable those infrastructures have become. So it's one of those deals where I have no doubt, having worked in some of those organizations, that there's probably things going on that we should be concerned about. But I also know that there are good guys on either side trying to do what they can to make sure that that doesn't happen. And that's kind of the comfort you get.
Right. So whoever's on the the call here is more than welcome to type the questions for Dr. Cunningham, and then and I'm going to keep on asking a few more questions while we're doing this. So you do a lot of work for veterans. I guess that's the question is maybe you can describe what kind of work you do to promote veterans and cybersecurity and so on, and then also if you could talk about a bit about the kind of the quote unquote gap in the qualified cybersecurity professionals, at least pre-COVID-19. I don't know if that's the same case now. If you don't mind just giving us a quick
so with veterans, because I came out of the military, I went through the programs, and most of the time they don't do a very good job of they try, but they don't do a really good job of running through your resume and applying to certain jobs and knowing people and those type of things, that because this is all about the network. I mean, you can have the best resume, but ultimately it's kind of who you know that will help you get in the door. So I spend a lot of my time telling folks, if they're getting out or if they need help with a resume or introductions or whatever, ping me up on LinkedIn, send me an email, send me a resume. I'll edit their resumes. I'll help prep it. I'll call them and say, here's what you should expect, those type of things. So, and I've had quite a few folks that I've worked with where it's helped them get a job. And I've had people that they've lost their job and they need another one. And, they've said, do you know anybody that might be interested? And I'll say, yep, here, let me get on the phone. And I mean, my goal is to get them connected and hired as fast as humanly possible. And I don't want anything from it. I just do it because it's the right thing to do. And I would want somebody to help me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's very honorable. Hey, so in terms of the gaps, like, what do you feel like are the kind of the future roles that are, very required if you had a choice in terms of like, taking courses or studying or specializing in certain areas? Where do you see like the upcoming gaps in the industry, both on the vendor side and the enterprise?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we actually need more is people that can translate technology to business, and that's what we're starting to get a very little bit of sort of cross-pollination taking place. And that's what we need more from folks is people that have come out of work roles that aren't specifically cybersecurity, technology, geek, computer science, whatever, that are just referentially sort of familiar with it and understand what it means, but can translate that into business speak. Because at the end of the day, the cybersecurity professionals, like someone on the business side is going to have to basically use your solution. And you can't say, it's because I'm a super smart technologist and I know more than you that you have to do these because the bad guys are coming. They don't care. They're going to say, well, what does that cost me? How does that align with budget? So we need more people that can do that delicate dance and translate between the two. And interestingly enough, like the people that have come from logistics and business schools and telecom and marketing, like they're great for that. They just need to understand a bit more about the technology side of the equation.
Absolutely. So in terms of and we talked about a bit about the COVID-19. So first of all, I really appreciate, where you see like the silver lining. I love to end in a positive note. What do you, have you seen like the impact on the industry, both on the kind of the vendors and enterprise, for people moving to, digital space very quickly. And what is personal impact on you as well, that if you can share that with us, that'd be great.
Yeah, the post-COVID world is going to need more cybersecurity professionals and those type of people. I mean, I jokingly tell people that the 3 jobs that are going to be needed after this whole thing is divorce lawyers, delivery doctors, and cybersecurity professionals, right? Because we've all been stuck inside so long.
Is that the order, or?
Well, maybe so. But we're going to need more of them, and I think that this market is going to continue to grow bigger. And the great thing that a lot of people kind of get wrapped around it is they're not looking at the broad side. Like, we're going to need more technologists, but we're going to need more marketing people, more business people, more on the far side. So my humble advice would be, don't be discouraged because you're not a hardcore technologist. Your skills can be used in this space. It's just how you translate them into what matters for the end user side of it.
Yeah, I completely agree. Also, I think curiosity and the aptitude to learn and the willingness to be exposed to new stuff, that's super important, more so than the actual, knowledge itself that you capture. So somebody's asking, do you want to just advise somebody trying to get into cyber and then free training, if you want to touch upon that briefly?
Yeah,
What would you be the go-to for you?
They basically said, is there any advice for somebody getting into cyber? Do you think classes and hands-on labs at cyber can help? Yeah, I take cyber classes. I think they're great. I take Udemy classes. There's some other folks that have come out with pretty solid solutions that are out there that'll help you do that. I mean, there's no better way to learn any job than to get your hands dirty. So use those. Watch YouTube videos and see the people that do those Metasploit things and modules and how to craft your own exploits. Take everything that you possibly can. To your point earlier, like what does Schwarzenegger say? Like, sleep faster. If you need 8 hours of sleep, sleep faster, take that extra hour and do some online training.
What about formal education? I know you have a lot of years under your belt. What's your take on that?
I think formal education is good, but I would caution you to be very specific about the programs you get into, because a lot of times there's a difference at the what I would never want anybody to do is burn money on something that's not going to benefit them. So be very specific about the outcome you want from that education, and make sure that it is a cybersecurity something program if you're going to do it, not a computer science program or developer or whatever else. And you have to be very, very selective about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think that's a rule of thumb, like everything in life, which kind of leads me to like the kind of the general questions. So maybe just describe that, your impact it had on you specifically. You meant, I think I saw you're working on muscle cars. Maybe you have some very diverse, hobbies. You were a bodybuilder. Is that true?
Well, I was trying to do a semi-pro show last year, and then I had a shoulder injury. And I'm not out of shape right now. I'm just not as big as I was. I'm still working my way back to it. And I have a muscle car that I work on too. So it's I'm one of those people that I hate to be bored. I'll find something to do. I don't like to sit around. It drives me nuts to sit there and have nothing to do all day.
Right. So the personal impact, what does the day look like today? Like, you get up in the morning, you take care of the kids, and then you jump into work. Like,
I usually wake up around, I set my alarm for 4 a.m. I'm up out of bed by 4:15. I do my workout and then eat, and then get the kids kind of situated. And since we're COVID, they're home. So I get them where they're not in my face all day. I love them, but and then it's on calls with clients, working on research, diving into that stuff. I try and set a goal to have one publication per week, whether it's a video or an audio or some blog or something like that. And then just keep trucking on through it. And then every day at 6 p.m., I cut it off. I'm not doing work for anybody. Then I'm going to go off and do something fun for me. It might be working on the car, it might be walking the dog, it might be lifting weights again. It just depends.
It's awesome. There's a couple questions here. What do you see being problematic with the new technology systems being developed to scan, monitor employees in the new era of work environment? That's actually, I saw there's an uptick in systems that monitor employees, remote employees being sold.
I think the question that folks should ask themselves is if they have a problem with it is really, well, why do you have a problem with it? Are you working remote? And are you going to be using that BYOD device for the purposes of business? Well, then if that's the case and you have to connect to that business enterprise, they should be able to monitor what you're doing. And I can tell you from being an operations person, like, they don't care what you're necessarily doing at home. If they're decent human beings, which most of them probably are, they just want to know if there's something indicative of threat and they want to respond to it. I'm not an advocate for people invading your privacy by any means. I carry a burner with me when I travel just because I don't want the cops looking at my phone. But if you're working for a company and they're paying your bills and you're remoting into their environment, I think it's only logical to accept that they're probably going to have some sort of monitoring of what you're doing on your machine. And that's just how we're going to have to live because we're remote. A couple other questions showed up in there. How do you tackle the challenge of getting major stakeholders, especially when it comes to slight cost of convenience? That's a great question. I deal with it all the time. I really asked them the question of, do you believe that security is a competitive differentiator, which there's plenty of studies that say it is, and do you believe that if we got ripped, if we got ransomed or whatever, that it would impact our ability to generate revenue 3 months from now? They'll say yes. And then you say, okay, well, we have to do something about that. Or do you disagree with that? And no one in their right mind is going to go, no, we should do nothing. And then you start walking them through, how to get to that. Last one there is around automotive industry. Like I said, I'm a diesel mechanic. That's as far removed from cybersecurity as someone could possibly be. So I think you can work your way into that. But what you should do is kind of, the good thing about an automotive person is you're good at picking parts and putting them together and making machines work. That's what cybersecurity is. That's what the cyberspace is components that we put together to make function. Start understanding how that plays into this broader strategic play and understand what your piece could be of making those mechanics work better.
So maybe kind of to wrap it up, maybe like ended up in a positive note. So I've seen, so there's like reports from medical industry, for example, that they're globally coming together because of the crisis, and they're creating some major collaboration, worldwide to combat the virus. Do you find it as a requirement, for us, for the cybersecurity professionals to come together and maybe combat, future, initiatives like that? Or what would that look like for you, and maybe end up in some positive things that you've come across, due to this pandemic?
I think the great thing that's going to come out of this, and I understand, I've had some people in my life that have been extremely affected by it, so I don't want anyone to ever think I'm minimizing it. But I think the benefit that come out of this will actually be that employers are going to see that the old way of doing business is no longer necessarily applicable. There's no reason for a lot of these people that have been remote for months now to have to go back to work. You should be able to have more home time, more family time, more you time. And your company should be able to also change their approach and say, well, I can realign my benefits. If I don't have to pay for people to come to my office and eat cereal, I can take that money and give it to you for fiber optic internet at home. I can give that to you for childcare, like those type of things. So I think in the follow on, what we're going to see out of this whole thing is that the security is going to improve. It's going to take a while. Remote workforce is the new standard, and companies that know what they're doing and care about their employees are going to find ways to use the dead weight to empower the future.
Mm-hmm. So somebody brought up an interesting question about privacy. You want to cover that, COVID-19 tracing requirement, seeing a lot of debates about privacy versus health benefits. Given your background, would be interesting to hear thought on individual freedoms versus common good and security implications of mass data collection. Do you trust collected data will not be abused?
No, I think it will be abused. I mean, I think that's a given, right? Facebook's been doing it. LinkedIn does it. Google does it. That's how businesses nowadays make money. I mean, we're all data mines, right? Data is the new oil. My phone knows more about me than the NSA ever will. And I mean, I can tell you, I worked at the NSA. Like, your credit card company knows more about you than the NSA and FBI ever will. So I don't think it's right. It bothers me. I lose sleep about it at night. But if it means that I can maybe, help save the life of another person if they know my location at a particular time, I'm okay with that. There's some give and take here. And I think you've got to understand that technology is great. And there are powerful things that can come from it. But for every benefit you get, there is also some sort of negative side of that equation. That's how mathematics works, right? You got to balance the equation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Somebody's asking, about the whether you actually think that the employers are going to do that. And then last week, I wanted to mention that AI, right? So they're talking about the AI and weaponizing AI.
Yeah.
I watched a movie lately that basically had, kind of the next Skynet being deployed. So Is this real, or do you feel that that's something that's completely far-fetched?
Well, I mean, I wrote a chapter on it, and the first sentence was there is no AI, right? We're not there yet. We're not to the singularity and the Kurzweilian sort of side of this equation. Quantum and some of those things are starting to scratch that itch where we might get to that. But in reality, the dystopian side of AI taking over and nuking us all into oblivion, probably not going to happen. But what we will see is that there will be some implications of weaponized approaches to using those solutions in the distant future.
Right. So any vendor that touts AI,
they hate me. Yeah, they hate me. They send me hate mail all the time.
So, and what's the difference between AI and machine learning? So machine learning is something that exists, right? It's like it's very.
I mean, when you look at an AI right now, basically what you're looking at is really powerful algorithms with really powerful processing and very specialized mathematics to do something and enable an outcome. There's no AI. When we think about AI and we actually look at what we mean by that, when we mean AI, we mean it's aware of itself. It's making decisions on its own. It's thinking and acting and whatever. We're a long way from that. It might happen to some degree in my lifetime, but we're not anywhere near that HAL stage, right? Where what are you doing, Dave?
Highly recommend if anybody did not watch that movie. Okay, good. So just maybe end up with a couple positive positive thoughts, and we talked about potentially giving out a discount code for your book. I'm gonna get that and
send it to you, and we can post that online.
Yeah, I would just purchase mine. I just have it on my Kindle. I highly recommend it. It's very good. It's very it's an easy read, despite the fact that it's a complicated topic. And despite being in the cyberspace for many years, there's a lot of things that I did not know. And kind of like, just for example, the history of APT and so on. Any positive kind of parting words?
Well, I mean, I think the positive side of this is, everybody that's willing to work in the space, like, we need you. If you're not a cybersecurity person yet, figure out how to do stuff and come help, because everyone has something to offer, and we can all benefit from everybody's insight and ability. And then the last thing I'd say too is, don't ever let anybody tell you can't do something. If anything, that should piss you off and make you figure out how to do it. And spite is actually a useful emotion. So leverage that.
That's awesome. Absolutely awesome. Thanks so much, Dr. Chase Cunningham. It's been a real pleasure having you. And then, I'll share this video with the rest of the group and a link to your, publications, and looking forward to potentially have you physically in New York when it's all said and done.
That'd be great. Love to do it.
Take care. Thanks. Thank you very much. Thanks, guys. It's been a real pleasure having you. I'm looking forward to seeing you this week, I guess Thursday. Take care. Thank you all.